The Ballast's Reckoning. From Bistro to Billionaire. CEO impactful opening. He leaned across the restaurant table, his new wife, Chloe, glittering in diamonds, and sneered at the woman he had abandoned. "It's a shame, Vivian," he crowed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people land promotions in super yachts in Monaco. Others, well, whatever this is." He believed she was finished, a discarded piece of his past. He thought she was nothing without him. What he didn't know was that while he was busy bragging, she was busy building an empire. And at the world's most exclusive event, he was about to watch his ex-wife step off a private billionaire's yacht, not as a guest, but as the chief executive officer, CEO. If you believe that a comeback built on genius is the sweetest revenge, hit the like button now. Humiliation at the bistro and the seed of vengeance. The aroma of roasted coffee and fine pastries usually brought comfort to Dr. Vivian Marsh. The small bistro, the lucid corner, was her one weekly splurge, a small island of normalcy in the turbulent ocean her life had become. It was here, laptop open and a warm cappuccino beside her, that she was rebuilding. Every line of code she wrote, every email she sent, was a brick in the new wall of her future. Then the bell above the door jingled, and a shadow fell across her table. "Well, look who it is," said a voice that still haunted her low moments. Vivian looked up. Her heart no longer broke. It merely seized like a car engine flooded with ice water. Trent Harrison, her ex-husband, stood there in a suit so new it looked starched. "It's an Armani," she noted with the clinical distance of an appraiser. Clinging to his arm was Chloe Vance. Blonde, bright, and blindingly expensive. A Cartier bangle was stacked next to a diamond tennis bracelet that Vivian knew, for a fact, cost more than her entire graduate education. "Trent, Chloe," Vivian said, her voice admirably steady. She closed her laptop. "Vivian, darling," Chloe chirped, her voice a sharp rattle of false sympathy. "I barely recognized you. You look comfortable." "Comfortable?" It was a dagger disguised as a compliment. Vivian wore simple dark jeans, a navy cashmere sweater, and her trusted old loafers. She had been working for 12 straight hours and stepped out for a breather. Chloe, meanwhile, looked fresh out of a Vogue editorial. "We were celebrating," Trent said, puffing out his chest. He signaled the waiter, not to order, but to be seen. "I got promoted. Senior Vice President of European Markets." "Congratulations, Trent," Vivian said, meaning it. A clean break was all she had ever truly wanted. "Things are really taking off," he continued, unable to stop himself. He was performing, not for her, but for Chloe and the restaurant at large. "The new bonus is, well, let's just say it's significant. We're flying to Monaco this weekend for the yacht exhibition. Our client, you know, the one I landed, has his 45-meter yacht docked at Port Hercule. It's another world, Vivian. You wouldn't believe it." Vivian felt the familiar heat rise in her cheeks. He wasn't just giving good news. He was rubbing her nose in what she had lost. Or rather, what he believed she had lost. "He's being modest," Chloe chirped. "He's the star of the whole firm. Everyone says so." Then she glanced at Vivian's laptop, wrinkling her perfectly sculpted nose. "Are you still, fiddling with that little ocean project? It's sweet that you have a hobby." "A hobby?" Vivian's hobby was a complex schema for an AI-driven, self-sustaining marine filtration system that could, in theory, clear microplastics from coastal waters at 10 times the rate of any current technology. It was the culmination of her life's work, the piece she had put on pause to support his career, the dream she had resurrected from the ashes of their marriage. "It's going well, thank you," Vivian said stiffly. Trent leaned in, his voice dropping to a condescending, confidential tone. "Listen, Vivian, I'm glad you're coping. Seriously, but don't you get tired of this? The little cafes, the trying. When we were married, you had everything. I had your everything, Trent. She corrected him, her voice low but sharp. I'm working on building my own. Trent laughed. It was a short, dry sound of pity. Sure, your own. Look, I know the divorce left you with, well, not much. If you're ever really in a bind, a real one, my assistant can probably find you some admin work. Data entry, maybe. It was the final, calculated cruelty, the offer of charity. He saw her as a broken, pathetic creature to be pitied, a cautionary tale he could tell his shiny new friends. I'll keep that in mind, Vivian said, her spine turning to steel. She gathered her things, leaving a few bills on the table. Oh, and Vivian, he called out as she reached the door. She paused but didn't turn around. Try to get out a little more. You look pale. She walked out of the lucid corner without looking back. The sound of his cackle and Chloe's tinkling laugh followed her into the street. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply walked faster, her mind already back on her schematics. He thought he was watching her drown. He had no idea she was learning to breathe underwater. Interactive question 1. What would you do in Vivian's shoes after that public humiliation? Walk away quietly or confront Trent right there? Comment your strategy. Share this story if you've ever had a ballast moment. From ballast to engine, the birth of Sterling Oceanic. The first month after the divorce, Vivian had lived in a fog. The betrayal wasn't just the affair with Chloe, a junior associate in his department. It was the words he had used. The final fight had been a masterpiece of psychological warfare. I'm suffocating, Vivian, he had shouted, gesturing around the beautiful minimalist apartment, the one she had decorated, the one she had managed while he focused on his career. You have no ambition, he had accused. I'm on a rocket ship and you are ballast. You're just dead weight. You used to be brilliant. Now all you talk about is plankton and ocean currents. It's boring. It's my field, Trent, she had shouted back, her voice raw. It's marine engineering. It's what I was doing when you met me. And now you just tinker, he sneered. Chloe gets it. She's hungry. She understands my world. His world. A world of business lunches and quarterly reports, of stock options and promotion. She had stepped down from her own ladder to keep his stable, and now that he had reached the top, he was kicking her off. The divorce settlement was calculated and swift. He had generously given her half their liquid assets, which she discovered had been systematically minimized for months. He kept the apartment, the car, the art. She was left with just enough to rent a tiny one-bedroom flat in San Francisco and a bitter taste in her mouth. For 2 months, she was the woman he accused her of being. Listless, broken, a ghost haunting a life she no longer recognized. She wondered if that was her fate. Would she just be Trent Harrison's ex-wife forever? Then, one rainy Tuesday, she was unpacking a box labeled old college stuff, and it broke open. Out spilled her old textbooks, her notes, and her thesis. The title, underlined in red, stared up at her. Dynamic AI Modeling for Autonomous Ocean Filtration Systems. It wasn't just a paper. It was her soul. She sold the only valuable thing he had left her, a set of diamond earrings he had given her for their 5th anniversary. She had always hated them. They felt like a transaction. She sold them and used the $15,000 to buy a used 3D printer, high-spec server components, and a membership to a local tech incubator space near the San Francisco waterfront, where rents were cheaper. She lived on instant ramen and cheap coffee. She worked 20 hours a day. She coded. She built. She simulated. She failed. The first prototype, a small, spider-like drone, sank to the bottom of the incubator's test tank and short-circuited. She cried for 10 minutes, wiped her eyes, and started rebuilding it from scratch. She submitted her proposal to 43 different venture capital firms, environmental grants, and tech incubators. 42 were rejected. Not commercially viable, one said. Too niche, said another. Overly ambitious scope for a new applicant, said a third. But one replied, it wasn't a yes, it was a maybe. Your proposal, while unconventional, has landed on the desk of our innovation committee. We are impressed by the core concept, but skeptical of the energy-to-filtration ratio claims. We invite you to present your findings at our Green Tech Innovation Summit. The email was signed by an assistant to the board of the Sterling Foundation. Vivian stared at the name. Sterling, as in Donovan Don Sterling, the eccentric, reclusive tech billionaire, the man who had revolutionized data processing in the 90s and then disappeared to invest his fortune in ocean conservation. He was a legend. He was also, according to industry rumors, absolutely ruthless and impossible to impress. She had one shot, the general and the $50 million deal. The headquarters of the Sterling Foundation was not a gleaming tower of glass and steel. It was a low, unassuming building of concrete and red wood, nestled in a pine forest near Portland, Oregon, a place that listened rather than shouted. Vivian, in her only good suit, a slightly large charcoal gray from a consignment shop, felt her hands trembling. She was in a boardroom that felt more like a university library, all dark wood and leather. At the end of a long table sat Don Sterling. He wasn't what she expected. He was in his 60s, with a shock of white hair, a weathered face, and piercing blue eyes. He wore a faded flannel shirt and jeans. He looked more like a fishing boat captain than a man worth $50 billion. Ms. Marsh, he said, his voice a low growl. He didn't rise. He just gestured to the chair across from him. You have 30 minutes. My team says your calculations are optimistic. Vivian took a deep breath. My calculations are accurate, Mr. Sterling. They are just new. For the next 20 minutes, she didn't just present. She taught. She soared. She showed her simulations, her data, her CAD models. She talked about fluid dynamics, AI route finding, and biopolymer compounds that could trap microfilaments without harming zooplankton. The board members, 3 men and 2 women in sharp suits, peppered her with questions. What about the energy cost? One asked. Solved, Vivian said, swiping to a slide. It's self-sufficient. It uses micro-tidal generators. It doesn't move against the current. It thinks with it. It's not a machine. It's a creature. There was silence. Don Sterling hadn't said a word. He just stared at her, his head cocked. Finally, he spoke. You built this in your apartment. It wasn't a question. And an incubator space, she clarified. With what? Your divorce settlement? Vivian flinched. The question was too personal, too sharp. With my capital, Mr. Sterling. It was seed funding from a previous investment that failed. A small smile touched Sterling's lips. Good answer, but you're wrong about something. Vivian's heart sank. It's over. You're asking for $5 million to build a full-scale prototype. Yes, that is the projection. Wrong, he said. He leaned forward. The full, terrifying weight of his intellect and power filled the room. $5 million is a rounding error. It's not enough to build this, to manufacture it at scale, to overcome regulatory hurdles, to deploy it in the Atlantic, the Pacific. You don't need $5 million. You need 50. And you need my entire logistics chain. You're thinking like a scientist. You need to start thinking like a general. Vivian was speechless. I don't understand. I'm not interested in funding your project, Ms. Marsh, Sterling said, standing up. The board members scrambled to their feet. Vivian felt the floor drop out from under her. I am interested in acquiring it, he continued, walking around the table. I'm creating a new subsidiary of Sterling Industries, It will be called Sterling Oceanic. We will absorb your patents, your research, and your prototype. We will give you my labs, my engineers, and my ships." He stopped directly in front of her. She had to crane her head back to look him in the eye. "And you," he said, "will be its chief executive officer." No. DEO, effective immediately. Your salary will be significant, but you will answer to no one but me. You will work harder than you have ever worked in your life. You will live on planes and in labs. You will not fail. Do you accept? Vivian's world, which had shrunk to the size of a one-bedroom apartment and a warm cappuccino, suddenly expanded to encompass the entire globe. She didn't hesitate. She didn't cry. She simply extended her hand. "When do I start?" Interactive question 2. Do you think Don Sterling is only interested in Vivian's technology? Or does he have ulterior motives? What kind of boss will an eccentric billionaire be? Comment your prediction for Trent's reaction when he hears about this. Monaco. The glorious conclusion. The next 6 months were a blur of motion. The timid, comfortable woman Trent had sneered at in the cafe was gone, forged into something new in the crucible of 100-hour work weeks. Vivian moved to Zurich, the new headquarters for Sterling Oceanic. Her first-class flights, I don't pay my CEOs to be tired, took her from engineering labs in Singapore to polymer foundries in Germany. The transformation was profound. It wasn't just the clothes, though she now wore the quiet, lethal elegance of stealth luxury, Loro Piana cashmere, and acris suits that whispered rather than shouted their worth. It was her presence. She presided over meetings with 30 engineers, all men, all older than her, and dissected their fluid dynamics reports with a precision that left no room for argument. She learned to command a room, not by being the loudest, but by being the most informed. Trent Harrison had faded into irrelevance. She hadn't thought about him in 178 days. Then, one Monday, Don Sterling called her. "Pack your bags, Vivian." "Where am I going?" she asked, pulling up her calendar. "Tokyo, Monaco," he said. "The yacht exhibition." Vivian paused. The name hit her like an unpleasant little stone. "The yacht exhibition, sir. I thought we were presenting to the ASEAN Environmental Council, and we will. But first, we're going to sell to the biggest polluters. Cargo ships aren't the problem, Vivian. It's these people, the mega yachts. They dump trash. They burn fuel. But they also want to look green. They're obsessed with image. And more than that, they're obsessed with new technology. They'll pay a premium for it." "So what? I'm setting up a booth?" Sterling laughed. "No, Vivian. You're not setting up a booth. You are the main event. I'm docking my flagship, the Odyssey. It's the most advanced green tech vessel on the planet. And for the last 3 months, it's had your full-scale Siren prototype secretly installed. We're not just presenting data. We're showing them the results. You are no longer a scientist asking for a grant. You are a CEO closing a deal. Port Hercule in Monaco wasn't just a harbor. It was a cathedral of wealth, a forest of white superstructures and gleaming chrome. Trent Harrison was in heaven. He stood on the teak deck of the Aurelia, a 45-meter yacht that, in the grand scheme of this harbor, was respectable, but not dominant. He was a guest of a guest, but he acted like he owned the place. Chloe, in a bright yellow bikini that was a little too tight, leaned against him. "Trent, darling, the champagne is warm. Tell them to bring another bottle of Dom." "Of course, babe," Trent said, snapping his fingers at a passing waiter. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated triumph. This was the moment he deserved. Then he saw her. She was standing on the dock, just past the security barrier, looking down at a tablet. She was dressed not for a party, but for business. An immaculate white silk blouse, tailored navy dress pants, and simple, elegant loafers. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun. Trent's smile widened. It was too perfect. His ex-wife, his charity case, right here, at the scene of his greatest triumph. She must be here as some low-level supplier's assistant. "Oh, this is priceless," he whispered to Chloe, pointing. Chloe squinted. "Is that Vivian? God, what is she doing here? She looks like she's going to a job interview." "I have to do this," Trent said, giddy on his own power. He leaned over the polished railing of the Aurelia. "Vivian!" he yelled. The potential client Swiss banker flinched at the breach of decorum. "Vivian Marsh!" Vivian looked up from her tablet. Her face registered no surprise, no anger, no humiliation. Only cool, polite recognition. She nodded. "What a coincidence running into you here," Trent yelled, his voice dripping condescension. "A little out of your depth, aren't you? This is the deep end. You should stick to the local swimming pool." "Hello, Trent, Chloe. You look well?" "We are," Trent boomed. "We're about to sign a deal. You know how it is. This is how the other half lives, right? What brings you here, cleaning the boats?" "I'm actually here for a presentation," Vivian said, her expression unreadable. "A presentation?" Trent let out a loud, arrogant laugh. "To who? The seagulls? Don't tell me it's your little ocean project." "Something like that," Vivian said. Just then, a silence fell over their section of the dock. The polite murmur of the crowd was pierced by the sound of a different kind of engine, the electric whine of a custom-built tender. It was a $500,000 speedboat painted matte black. It sliced the water and pulled up to the VIP security gate right where Vivian stood. The security guards, who had been ignoring everyone, snapped to attention. Two men in sober, dark suits stepped out, followed by a figure that made Trent Harrison's blood run cold. It was Don Sterling himself, the single most powerful, reclusive, and respected man in green technology. He was a king, and this harbor was his court. Trent's Swiss banker client gasped. That is Sterling!" Sterling strode onto the dock, saw Vivian, and a warm smile broke across his weathered face. He ignored the stares and the whispers. "Vivian, darling," he said, his voice ringing clearly over the water. "Is everything ready for the demonstration?" Vivian nodded, all business. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. The new filtration metrics just came in from the Odyssey's traverse. They are exceptional." Trent's brain tried to process the words. Mr. Sterling. Vivian. Odyssey. Exceptional. It was an impossible word salad. Sterling grinned. "Told you never to bet against a good idea." Then he gestured to the waiting tender. "After you, Madam CEO, Madam CEO." The two words hung in the air. Trent's champagne glass froze halfway to his mouth. Chloe's perfect smile dissolved, leaving her face blank and slack-jawed. Vivian Marsh, the ballast, the hobbyist, the woman he had offered a data entry job, stepped onto the tender. She sat down, crossed her legs, and just before the boat pulled away, she looked up. She made eye contact with Trent. She didn't smile. She didn't sneer. She just held his gaze. It was a look of pure, cold, indifferent finality. The tender sped off, not toward a mid-level ship like the Aurelia, but toward the harbor horizon, where the undisputed queen of the exhibition was anchored, the Odyssey. It was a 100-meter leviathan of sustainable glass and teak, a technological marvel everyone had been talking about, but aboard which no one had been invited. And his ex-wife, the woman he had called boring, was heading to its deck. Interactive question. How do you think Trent will react to those two words, Madam CEO? Is Vivian's victory purely professional success or a personal redemption? Comment your thoughts. We want to hear your deepest analysis. Trent's breakdown and Sterling's cleanup. On the teak deck of the Aurelia, the silence was a physical thing. Trent Harrison was frozen, his arms still resting on the railing, the champagne glass forgotten. "Madam CEO." The two words echoed in the sudden vacuum, replaying in his mind. He couldn't make them fit. The Swiss banker, Mr. Stab, who had until now been the picture of bored politeness, now looked at Trent with a new, terrifying intensity. He looked like a biologist who had just discovered a particularly unpleasant insect species. "You know Vivian Marsh?" Stab asked. His voice was no longer bored. It was a cold, flat sheet of steel. Trent, still trying to salvage the situation, puffed out his chest. "Know her? Of course, I made her. She's my ex-wife." He said the last two words with a familiar dismissive arrogance. It was the wrong move. Stab's eyes widened, and he let out a short, sharp cackle of pure, disbelieving contempt. "Your ex-wife?" Chloe, who had been clinging to Trent's arm, now looked utterly lost. Her perfect smile was gone, replaced by open-mouthed confusion. "Trent, what is he talking about? CEO? That's impossible. He must be mistaken. She's nothing." "As the new CEO of Sterling Oceanic," Stab cut in, his voice slicing the air. He pointed to the tender, now a black dot, speeding toward the Odyssey. "Her Little Ocean project, as you so charmingly called it, is a patented AI-driven filtration system that is about to become a mandatory installation on every commercial vessel on Earth." Stab stepped closer. "The new UN maritime regulation, which I am told is being announced next month, is being written around her technology. She's not just green tech, you fool. She's a global tax. She is a one-woman monopoly. Every person in this harbor, every shipping magnate, every cruise line, every one of these yacht owners will be paying her company millions starting next year, just for the privilege of floating." He paused, letting the crushing weight of the revelation fall. "And you," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper of pure disgust. "You, the man who has been begging my firm for a minor investment. You stood here on my friend's boat and yelled at her. You offered her a cleaning job." Trent was speechless. He could only stare. "That's the point," Stab snapped. "That's the entire point. You were married to a mind like that. A mind that is about to change the world, and you didn't know it. You looked at a diamond and thought it was a piece of glass. You called her ballast." Stab straightened his tie. His face was a mask of finality. "Our meeting, Mr. Harrison, is terminated. My firm's potential investment is also terminated. I don't do business with fools. It's bad for the portfolio. You are an embarrassment, a liability." He turned and walked away. Trent stood there. He looked at Chloe. She was staring at him, her face pale, her eyes wide. The cold swiftness of calculation was evident. She was assessing her losses. "Trent," she said, her voice utterly flat. All the sweet cooing was gone. "Chloe, honey, listen," he began, trying to reach for her arm. It's a complication. It doesn't mean anything." She took a physical step back from his hand, as if it were covered in grime. "You are a fool," she whispered, her voice laced with a venom that chilled him to the bone. "You had her, and you let her go from me." The implication was clear. She herself was a terrible investment, and she was furious at him for making it. "Get me another drink," he snarled, a desperate, pathetic attempt to reassert his dominance. "Get it yourself." She snatched her designer handbag from the deck chair. With one last withering look of contempt, she turned and walked away from him. She headed toward a group of Italian men near the bar who had been watching the entire exchange, a predatory smile already forming on her lips. She was already liquidating her assets and looking for the next host. Trent Harrison was left completely, utterly alone on the deck, surrounded by laughter and music. The champagne in his hand was warm and watery. He looked across the harbor toward the Odyssey, lit up like a floating palace, a beacon of a power he could never, ever touch. He hadn't just lost his ex-wife, he had thrown her away. He had thrown away the key to the entire world. All because he was too arrogant, too small, and too blind to see what was right in front of him. The toast to the currents. On the aft deck of the Odyssey, it wasn't a party space. It was a theater of innovation. The sun was setting over Monaco, casting the super yachts in rich golden light. But here, on Don Sterling's flagship, the lighting was a cool electric blue. Dr. Vivian Marsh stood at the podium. She was not the woman from the cafe. She was the CEO. The problem, Vivian began, her voice perfectly modulated, has always been scale. We talk about cleaning the oceans, but we do it with nets and barges, like trying to empty a stadium with a teaspoon. We have been treating the symptoms, not the system. She clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up with a dynamic 3D model of the Atlantic Gyre. The siren system doesn't attack. It adapts. It doesn't fight the currents. It thinks with them. It's not a filter. It's an AI-driven autonomous marine ecosystem. She displayed the results on a screen from the Odyssey. The ship had been deliberately following a cargo route. "This is the water we took in," she said, showing astonishing levels of microplastics. "And this," she said, her voice dropping, "is the water we released." The pollutant numbers were 0, all of them. But a new meter had appeared. Oxygenation and phytoplankton viability. Both were up 15%. A gasp, a collective intake of breath, swept through the crowd. "We are not just cleaning the ocean," Vivian said, her voice ringing with the unbreakable conviction of truth. "We are healing it. The S-1000 is not a cost. It is the future of maritime viability. It is the price of admission to a planet no longer willing to wait." She paused. "The new UN maritime regulation, which my team and I helped draft, will be presented next month. A system like this will not be optional. My team at Sterling Oceanic is now taking pre-orders for the first wave deployment." The next hour was a blur. Vivian secured letters of intent and firm orders, totaling over $900 million. She finally made her way to the bow, seeking a moment of silence. Mr. Stabb was the first to reach her. "I must apologize. Your vision, it is magnificent," he told her. His face flushed. The Greek magnate, Stavros, yelled over his shoulder, "I want 20 units. I'll pay a 50% premium for expedited delivery. We'll retrofit my entire fleet." She handled it all masterfully. She was precise, charming, yet not warm. Brilliant, yet not arrogant. She was, in every sense, the CEO. She ascended the private spiral staircase to the Odyssey's top deck, a space reserved for only 2 people, Don Sterling and his CEO. "I'd say that went rather well," Sterling said, his back to her. $900 million in one afternoon, Vivian mused, a tired but genuine smile on her face. "Not bad for a day's work, Madam CEO." He finally turned to her, his blue eyes sharp in the twilight. "You handled that distraction well today." Vivian flushed. "The distraction, sir? You mean Trent Harrison?" "Your ex-husband. I watched the whole thing from the tender. He was loud and spectacularly wrong. I apologize. I promise it will never ever happen again." Sterling held up a hand. "Vivian, stop. You do yourself a great disservice to apologize for his failure. You have nothing to regret." "I don't understand how he was here," she said, shaking her head. "His firm, Harrison and Associates, is not at this level." "Ah, yes. Harrison and Associates, mid-tier financial services, ambitious but over-leveraged," Sterling said, sipping his water. "I bought them 7 months ago." The air left Vivian's lungs. You bought Trent's company?" "Correct. It was a distressed asset. I absorbed their portfolio to get a hold of some of their biotech holdings. Harrison and Associates was just part of the package." "Then, you knew?" "I knew of him," Sterling corrected. but I asked my head of compliance to do a deep dive. Standard procedure. When you were being considered for a senior executive, we checked for possible liabilities. Turns out, Mr. Harrison is not just an arrogant fool, Vivian. He's a thief. A thief? She whispered. First, from you. My audit found he'd been filing benefits claims for a spouse he divorced 6 months prior. He was still claiming you as a dependent on his health plan. That's fraud. And then he stole from me. His expense reports were a work of fiction. He was charging client dinners in Portofino and Paris, dinners which, when cross-referenced, were found to be with Ms. Chloe Vance. He was using company funds to build his shiny new life. You acquired my company, Vivian said, the words catching in her throat. Because it was brilliant. Because it was the future. Sterling nodded. It is the single most important piece of marine engineering I have ever seen. You are a genius, and I wanted that genius on my team. That is the only reason you are here. He paused, then allowed a small, cold smile to touch his lips. And it added, as a synergistic bonus, the opportunity for me to do some overdue house cleaning. I don't tolerate parasites in my ecosystem, Vivian. Not in the ocean, and not in my boardrooms. 100 meters away on the public dock, Trent Harrison sat on a cold marble bench. His phone vibrated. It was an automated email from Human Resources. Subject: Employment status. Notification. Dear Mr. Harrison, you are hereby notified that your position as Senior Vice President has been eliminated as part of a strategic corporate restructuring, effective immediately. Your access to all systems has been revoked. Cause for this termination is under review by our compliance department, pending an audit of your expense and benefits history. The phone slipped from his hand. He didn't scream. He deflated. On the deck of the Odyssey, Vivian looked out at the water. He called me ballast, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He said I was dead weight holding him back. An understandable error, Sterling replied, joining her at the railing. He is a man who has only ever lived on the surface. He is impressed by the whitecaps, the spray, the noise. He has no idea of the power of the currents beneath, the ones that actually move the world. He raised his glass of water, the ice clinking softly. To the currents, Madam CEO. Vivian raised her champagne flute, the bubbles catching the moonlight. She thought of the code she wrote, the engines she designed, the deep, silent, powerful systems that were at that very moment healing the world. To the currents, she said, her voice clear and strong. Let's turn the tide. Meaningful conclusion and final call to action. What an epic comeback. Dr. Vivian Marsh didn't just get revenge. She gained redemption. She proved that the person someone discards might be the treasure the whole world is waiting for. Her ex believed she was ballast, but she was the brilliant mind with the power to change the world. He was left with his arrogance, and she was left with an empire. What do you think of this conclusion, and how Don Sterling handled the situation? Do you believe Trent got what he deserved? Leave us your opinion in the comments. We read at every single one. If you loved this story of triumph and poetic justice, hit like and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We have a new powerful story coming very soon, and you don't want to miss it. Epilogue. The shifting tides of power were at 4. The final audit and the cold confrontation 6 months after the Monaco Yacht exhibition. The siren system was not just a marvel, it was a mandatory global utility. Dr. Vivian Marsh, CEO of Sterling Oceanic, was on the cover of Forbes, not for her wealth, but for her influence. She was no longer just a scientist. She was a world builder, steering regulations and technology in equal measure. Meanwhile, Trent Harrison had vanished from the glittering landscape of Chicago finance. Stripped of his job, his reputation, and his significant bonus structure, he found that the world he once dominated was surprisingly cold when he was no longer valuable. Chloe, true to her nature, had left him before the plane even landed back from Monaco, selling her diamond tennis bracelet to afford a first-class ticket out of his life. Trent now lived in a small, rented apartment, his days filled with calls from compliance officers and lawyers. He was a creature of habit, and his habits were his undoing. One morning, Vivian was in the Zurich headquarters, reviewing the final compliance audit of the defunct Harrison & Associates, now a shell of Sterling Industries. The head of compliance, a woman named Ms. Thorne, placed a single, damning folder on her desk. "This is the final report on Trent Harrison, Madam CEO," Ms. Thorne said, her voice crisp. "The audit confirmed substantial misuse of company funds. We are pursuing civil restitution for over $500,000. However, the most egregious fraud was the continued claim of spousal benefits long after the divorce was finalized. Since this directly involves you and our corporate health plan, it requires a statement." Vivian picked up the folder. Inside were copies of medical forms, signatures forged by Trent, claiming that she was his dependent. He had continued to siphon money from the system for months, even after calling her ballast. "He used the system I created to steal from me," Vivian murmured, a bitter irony. "Indeed. We have offered him a final chance to resolve the matter quietly. Sign over the remainder of his personal assets to cover the debt, and we drop the criminal complaint for fraud. And if he refuses, he faces jail time. He lost the last court motion to retain his remaining assets, a small but valuable art collection. It's set for auction next week. We believe the funds from the auction will be used to pay the restitution." Vivian closed the folder, her face unreadable. She knew Trent's single greatest vanity was his small, curated collection of modern art. Selling it to pay for his humiliation would be the final cut. "I need to meet with him," Vivian stated. "Arrange a meeting at the law firm handling the asset transfer. Just him and me. No lawyers. The art auction and the final price." The meeting took place in a sterile conference room in a downtown San Francisco legal office, a far cry from the glittering offices of Trent's former life. Trent walked in, dressed in a cheap, ill-fitting suit. He looked older, defeated and hollow. The ambition that once radiated from him like heat was gone, replaced by a cold, desperate fear. "Vivian," he rasped, standing awkwardly. He hadn't seen her since the Monaco dock. Vivian sat at the head of the table, composed and powerful. She wore a simple black suit, an outfit that cost more than his remaining savings, but spoke of competence, not flash. "Trent," she replied, her voice neutral. She slid the final settlement document across the table. "You know why you're here. Sign this, and the civil matter is closed. You forfeit your assets, and the criminal complaint is dropped." Trent stared at the document, his gaze lingering on the line item for the art collection forfeit. "You're taking the art," he whispered. "You know what that means to me." "It means you pay your debt," Vivian said, meeting his eyes. "You accumulated that debt by lying, Trent. Lying to me, lying to the firm, lying to yourself. You stole from the system and you're paying the price." "It was just a few forms, Vivian. Everyone does it. You're the CEO of a billion-dollar company. You could make this go away with one phone call. You want to ruin me over a hobby?" The word hobby hung in the air, a cruel echo from the past. Vivian stood up, leaning her hands on the table. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the authority of the deep currents she now commanded. "No, Trent, I don't want to ruin you. You did that yourself. But I am here because you need to understand the difference between value and worth." She paused, letting the silence build. "You called me ballast. You discarded the work of my life, the core of my being, as a hobby. You valued a corporate title and a diamond bracelet more than integrity and commitment. That was your choice. You thought my worth was tied to your career. You were wrong. She tapped the folder containing the audit. Now look at this. You have been caught stealing. Your ambition was fueled by fraud. You are losing your precious art collection to pay for the hobby you mocked. The price is your pride. The final price is the consequence of your choice. Trent's facade finally cracked. He buried his face in his hands, defeated. I'm sorry, Vivian. I never thought it would come to this. The moment you called me ballast, it was already here, she replied, her voice softening slightly. Not out of pity, but finality. Sign the papers, Trent. He slowly raised his head, his eyes red. He picked up the pen and with a shaky hand signed his name, officially relinquishing his last tangible claim to his former life. Vivian didn't take the pen. She didn't say goodbye. She simply gathered the signed documents. Ms. Thorne will handle the transfer, she said. She walked toward the door, paused, and looked back at him. And Trent, she added, when you're ready to rebuild, start with honesty, not ambition. Then she was gone, leaving Trent alone in the sterile room to face the full silence of his failure. The curator's gift and the new current. The day of the art auction, Vivian didn't attend. She was in Oslo, signing a landmark environmental treaty. However, she had sent Ms. Thorne with specific instructions. The auction proceeded. The final, desperate vestiges of Trent Harrison's vanity sold off piece by piece to satisfy his debt to Sterling Industries. The final hammer fell. The debt was settled. Later that week, back in Zurich, Ms. Thorne reported the successful transaction. The money has been returned to Sterling Industries, Madam CEO. Your instructions regarding the Ames Denton bronze were followed. The small wave? Vivian asked, recalling the piece. A simple, elegant bronze sculpture of a breaking wave that Trent had always called too subdued. Yes, it was purchased, as requested. It is now registered as an asset of the Sterling Foundation. Vivian smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that reached her blue eyes. Good. Have it delivered, not to my office, but to the Southport Marine Science Center in Maine. Ms. Thorne raised an eyebrow. Is that a donation, Madam CEO? It's a gift, Ms. Thorne, Vivian clarified. It's a small piece of art for the children's study area. It should be placed next to the tidal pool exhibit. A constant reminder that the true power of the ocean is not in the size of the waves, but in the strength of the current beneath them. Vivian turned to the panoramic window of her office, overlooking the vast, technologically advanced testing facility of Sterling Oceanic. She wasn't standing on the deck of a yacht, but on the bridge of a global movement. She had achieved more than revenge. She had achieved vindication. She had turned the ballast of her own life into the foundational material for the world's future. Her story was complete. Not with a diamond or a title, but with the quiet, powerful knowledge that she had chosen integrity, and integrity had ultimately won. The price of easy, a billionaire's regret, and the secret that doubled. If you've ever chosen the path of least resistance, get ready. This is what happens when easy costs you everything. 3 years ago, CEO Arthur Vance walked away from the woman he loved for her simpler best friend. He called her too complicated. Today, he walked into a hotel lobby and saw 2 little girls with his eyes. The sight of his past, and his hidden future, is why this video has gone viral. You won't believe what he did next. Subscribe right now. Hit the like button and leave a comment telling us, what do you think is the true cost of choosing convenience over connection? Chapter 1. The Quiet Collapse. The London penthouse. The office was a monument to quiet, expensive power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a cold, sweeping view of the London skyline, and the sound-dampening glass made the faint tick of a designer clock on the wall seem louder than ever. Amelia Beaumont stood perfectly still in the center of the room. Her dark mahogany hair was smoothed back into a sharp, professional ponytail, her hazel eyes steady, though her heart was hammering a painful rhythm against her ribs. She hadn't expected a confession. Not like this, not delivered so casually, as if he were discussing quarterly figures and not demolishing the 6 years of life they had built together. Arthur Vance had his back half turned to her, his hand resting on the sleek mahogany desk. His jaw was tight, his ice-blue eyes fixed on a point far beyond the city horizon. Looking at her would have made the truth too real. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost soft, which somehow made the words feel 10 times sharper. It's easier with Scarlett. The words didn't echo. They landed flat, heavy and definitive. Amelia blinked once, then twice, not in disbelief, but in a slow, chilling recognition of something she had felt creeping into their expensive Chelsea home for months. It wasn't the kind of shock that makes the world shake. It was the silent collapse of something that had been cracking for a long time. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg. She didn't ask why. She just looked at him. The man she had loved so deeply, she once believed his name was written into her future. His hair was slightly longer than usual, falling across his forehead in a way she used to smooth with her fingers. His expression was carefully composed, the way someone looks when they have convinced themselves that logic justifies the pain. He thought he was being honest. He thought honesty was enough. "It's easier with her," he repeated, softer this time, as if saying it with less force could make it sound less cruel. There was a flicker in his expression when he finally turned to face her. It wasn't guilt. Guilt would have been a mercy. It was relief. Relief, because he had chosen what he believed would simplify his life. He confused depth with difficulty, devotion with heaviness, and her quiet strength with something that demanded too much from him. Amelia inhaled slowly, her chest tight, but her back ramrod straight. She had spent months noticing the messages he answered too quickly, the late meetings that weren't meetings, the careful evasion whenever she mentioned Scarlett's name. She had tried to ignore it, because love sometimes breeds patience to the point of self-harm. But now, there was no more room to pretend. She spoke, but her voice wasn't sharp. It was quiet, measured. The voice of someone walking out of a burning building who refuses to carry the smoke with them. "Then go," she said. Not a command, a release. His jaw clenched, as if he hadn't expected her to make it so effortless. Perhaps he had envisioned tears, pleas, and desperation. Maybe he had wanted to feel desired on his way out. But Amelia had already learned something he hadn't. Sometimes, dignity is the only thing you can save when someone chooses to leave. She turned and picked up her tailored tote bag from the chair, her movements calm, practiced, as if she had rehearsed this in her mind long before this moment. Arthur didn't move. He didn't try to stop her. He watched her walk to the door, with the same distance he had shown her for months. And as she reached for the handle, she paused only once, not to look back, but to take a breath, to steady herself, to reclaim her own name from any version of herself that had been molded around him. She didn't say goodbye. As the elevator doors closed behind her and the opulent lobby opened before her, the outside world felt too bright, too loud, too real. The city moved as if nothing in her life had changed. People talked, laughed, and rushed. She walked forward, one step, then another, because stopping would mean breaking, and she refused to break for someone who had chosen the easy way over the real thing. It was only when she reached the cool, open air that she placed a hand on her abdomen, where a life, two lives, were quietly, secretly, beautifully beginning to grow. She hadn't planned to tell him yet. She had been waiting for the right moment, the right piece. Now, she understood. The right moment would never have existed. He had left before he even knew. But she, for the first time in a long time, felt the faint spark of a future that was only hers. Chapter 2. The Aegean Exile and the Doubled Secret. Amelia didn't just leave. She executed a slow, careful withdrawal. London, once feeling like home, now seemed noisy and intrusive, filled with reminders of conversations, late dinners, bitter-tasting laughter, and dreams she had once tethered to a man who chose convenience over love. She packed her belongings alone, folding clothes into boxes, not with anger, but with a quiet numbness, like someone tending to a wound that hasn't started bleeding yet. She told no one where she was going, not co-workers, not mutual acquaintances, not even family at first. Silence became her shield. The travel was unpleasant. Morning sickness arrived in unpredictable waves, and exhaustion settled deep in her bones. But she kept moving. She looked at maps for places where the sea wasn't crowded with tourists, and the air was soft. She finally found a tiny coastal village in Crete, a spot that barely made it into travel guides. It had narrow streets lined with blooming jasmine, a bakery that opened before dawn, and houses with peeling paint and windows that overlooked an endless blue sea. It was quiet enough to breathe again. She rented a small, weather-beaten cottage on the edge of the village. It wasn't perfect. The wallpaper was peeling in the hall, and the floorboards creaked loudly at night. But the windows opened to the sound of the waves, and the mornings were brightened by a soft light that made everything feel like a beginning. Amelia knew she couldn't afford luxuries anymore. Her savings were limited, her income uncertain. She took a part-time job at a local bookshop, shelving books, writing inventory by hand, and sweeping the floors at closing. The pay was modest, but the place was warm, filled with people who spoke in low voices and asked no questions. The pregnancy changed her silently at first. She would pause on her walk home, placing her hand over her belly, feeling something move inside her, a reminder that this journey was not just hers. Fear came, of course, fear of raising a child unsupported, fear of the nights when exhaustion would be stronger than patience, fear of sickness, of mistakes, of how to answer when someone asked about the father. But with time, fear began to share space with something else. When the doctor told her there were 2 heartbeats, she didn't speak for a long moment. The world seemed to tilt. Her chest tightened, and tears came from a deep, wordless place. 2 lives, 2 futures, 2 pieces of her, and him, growing inside her. She thought she would feel overwhelmed or trapped, but what she felt was something firmer, quieter, a kind of sacred responsibility. She prepared the cottage herself. She bought a second-hand crib and painted it white. Then she found an identical one at a thrift store across the village. Slightly worn, but still strong. She washed the baby clothes with lavender soap, hung them outside to dry in the salt air, and watched them swing like tiny flags in the sunlight. The locals noticed her eventually, not with gossip, but with gentle curiosity. An elderly woman named Kyria Elpida often showed up with baskets of fresh bread or soup, saying only, "You shouldn't be cooking when you look so tired," and disappearing before Amelia could refuse. There were nights when the loneliness pressed hard against her ribs, nights when she lay awake listening to the sea and wondered if Arthur ever thought of her, if he missed her laugh, if he realized what he had thrown away. But she learned not to dwell on those thoughts. He had chosen his path. Now she was choosing hers. The day she gave birth, the ocean was calm. It was hard, painful, and overwhelming. She cried, not from fear, but from the sheer force of bringing life into the world. When the babies were placed in her arms, tiny and warm, both with dark hair and bright, astonishingly blue eyes, she felt something inside her unclench, something that had been tense since the day she stood in that office. She named them Lyra and Eleni. Lyra, for the openness she wanted her daughter to always feel inside herself. Eleni for the wisdom, the sweetness, the strength that doesn't need to roar to be real. The first months were exhausting in ways she couldn't have imagined. 2 babies meant 2 cries, 2 needs, 2 bodies pressed against her chest at all hours. She barely slept. She often cried silently while rocking them in the dim early morning light. But even in the hardest moments, when her arms shook from fatigue and her heart felt too stretched, she felt something else: gratitude. Every morning, she took them to the shore in a double stroller, the waves muffling the world around them. Tourists only saw a young mother with 2 beautiful babies. They didn't know the heartbreak, the rebuilding, the quiet triumph she carried with her. With every passing month, Amelia grew stronger. Her voice became firmer, her heart softer, yet also tougher where it needed to be. She didn't erase the past. She learned to live beyond it, and far away, in another city, Arthur lived a life that looked polished on the outside, but felt increasingly empty. He never knew why the silence felt heavier now, why certain sunsets ached in his chest, why he couldn't sleep some nights. The world was already slowly preparing the moment when their paths would cross again. But for now, Amelia simply held her daughters and watched the sea. Unaware of the storm and the healing that awaited her. Audience interaction. Amelia chose the name Eleni, which means light and wisdom, to reflect her strength. What quality do you think is most important for a single mother rebuilding her life? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like this video. Chapter 3. 3 years of reconstruction. Amelia built her life in small, steady layers. Every day became a routine she could cling to, something that kept her grounded. In the mornings, she woke before the sun, rising slowly not to disturb the warm little bodies snuggled against her. Lyra always slept curled near her chest, a tiny hand grasping her shirt, while Eleni sprawled out as if she owned the entire bed, messy curls and mouth slightly open. Amelia would watch them breathe first, letting that quiet moment remind her of why she was living. She learned to do everything at double speed: 2 breakfasts, 2 sets of clothes, 2 pairs of small shoes that somehow always disappeared into opposite corners of the house. She laughed more than she expected. Not a loud, boisterous laugh, but a small, soft laugh that lived in the corners of her mouth and the warmth of her chest. The kind of laughter she had never had before. The village began to recognize the 3 of them as a familiar sight. People smiled as the stroller passed, waved when Amelia and the girls sat outside the bakery with warm rolls that left crumbs on their small dresses. Lyra was the quieter one, cautious and observant, her blue eyes always studying everything around her. Eleni was bold, her laughter bright, her hands always reaching out, always curious. They balanced each other naturally, like two halves of the same beat. When they turned one, Kyria Elpida and a few neighbors gathered in the yard with candles and a homemade cake, singing while the wind played with the clothes on the line. Amelia held the girls in her lap, overwhelmed by a feeling of belonging she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the life she once imagined, but it was real. It was steady. It was filled with small joys she never knew she wanted. Time passed, and the girls began to grow into themselves. They learned to run on the sand, their tiny footprints erasing themselves behind them. They learned to say mama, first in shy whispers, then in cheerful shouts. Amelia's heart ached with joy, every time. She told them stories at night of oceans, constellations, and brave girls who chose their own paths. She never mentioned him, but sometimes, in quiet moments, when she closed the shop, when she stood on the shore while the girls played, when she washed dishes under the warm hum of the kitchen light, Arthur would return to her thoughts, no longer with longing, but with a soft pang. She wondered if he was happy, if he thought of her at all, if he ever considered that love wasn't meant to be easy. She heard things through the distant thread of online acquaintances. He and Scarlett had lasted less than a year. There were rumors, arguments, blame, resentment. A child that didn't survive. Amelia didn't know the details, and she didn't look for them. The past was no longer her home. She had moved on. She had rooted herself in a place where no one knew who she had been, only who she was now. Yet, even as she rebuilt, a piece of the past remained embedded in the present, in two pairs of bright blue eyes that mirrored his. Sometimes she saw him in their giggles, in the slight tilt of Lyra's head, in Eleni's stubbornness. The girls didn't know. They only knew their mother loved them fiercely and infinitely. Still, there were moments, small and fleeting, when Amelia imagined what it would be like for them to have a father. Not the man he was when he left, but someone who could kneel in the sand and tie shoelaces, who could lift them to touch tree branches, who could teach them things she didn't know how to teach. The thought came not with bitterness, but with a quiet curiosity. 3 years passed like this, slow, steady, and healing. The girl's laughter filled her home. The sea became the soundtrack of her life. Amelia found a gentle peace she once believed she would never feel again. But life has a way of returning to that which we thought we had closed forever. It doesn't ask if we are ready. One warm summer afternoon, when the girls were a few months over 3 years old, the bookshop owner, Mr. Stavros, announced they needed help organizing a charity event at a hotel in the neighboring town, a fundraiser for children's art programs. Amelia agreed to help, thinking only of supporting the community that had so gently held her all these years. She didn't know that the hotel lobby she would soon step into, holding her daughter's tiny hands, would be the very place where Arthur Vance was standing, unaware that the life he once abandoned was about to walk directly into his line of sight. Not because fate was cruel, but because fate was precise. Chapter 4. The Encounter. 2 pairs of blue eyes. The hotel lobby in the nearby coastal town was filled with the warm murmur of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the soft melody of a piano played by a young musician near the entrance. The walls were decorated with framed photographs of the Aegean coast, and long, sheer curtains swayed gently whenever the doors opened to let in the summer breeze. Amelia walked slowly, one hand holding Lyra's, the other Eleni's. The girls were dressed in light summer dresses with small embroidered flowers, their dark hair tied up with matching blue ribbons. They moved with the innocent excitement of children discovering a new place, pausing to look at the grand chandelier or the fountain in the center of the lobby. Amelia kept her expression calm, but her heart was beating faster than usual. Crowds still unnerved her. Too many eyes meant too many potential questions. But the fundraiser was important to the community, and she had promised Mr. Stavros she would help. She adjusted the small bag on her shoulder and guided the girls toward the reception desk where the volunteers were meeting. Meanwhile, in another part of the hotel, Arthur was talking to one of the event organizers, nodding politely, although his attention frequently drifted to the window, where the ocean shimmered in the late afternoon light. His life had become a cycle of meetings, obligations, and polite conversations that required long stretches of emotional neutrality. He had learned to appear present even when he felt strangely empty. He had gained everything he thought he wanted years ago: success, recognition, control. Yet beneath it all was a current of unrest he couldn't name. He had agreed to attend the charity event to support a business partner, expecting nothing more than speeches, donations, and another night of polite applause. He certainly didn't expect that the moment he turned toward the main staircase, his breath would catch in his chest. From across the room, he saw a woman kneel to adjust the ribbon in a small girl's hair. The movement was soft, familiar in a way that hit him before he could understand why. Her hair was dark brown and soft, falling around her shoulders as she bent close. Her posture, her hands, the way she spoke gently to the child, it all triggered a memory he hadn't allowed himself to go near for years. Amelia. The name formed in his mind not with shock, but with a deep, sudden pang, like a bruise unexpectedly pressed. He froze. He still couldn't see her face, only her back, and the two small girls standing beside her, one fidgeting with excitement, the other holding tight to her mother's dress. Something inside him tightened, a pull that was both instinctive and terrifying. Amelia stood up and turned. He saw her eyes, warm, deep, steady, and felt all the air leave his body. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch, but her expression changed almost imperceptibly. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even surprise. It was the look of someone who has already survived the worst part of the story. But it was the girls who broke him. Two small girls. Twins. Both with dark hair and eyes as blue as the sky reflected over a calm ocean. Eyes that matched his own. Eyes he had seen in the mirror every morning of his life. They looked up at him with curiosity, innocent and unprotected, unaware of what their existence meant to the man standing mere steps away. His heart was no longer steady. It slammed against his ribs, every beat resounding with a realization that hit deeper than anything he had ever felt. He took a single step forward, then another. Slowly, as if the ground beneath him might break if he moved too fast. The noise of the lobby softened to nothing. The room seemed to shrink until there were only 4 people in it: himself, Amelia, and the 2 little girls who were clearly his daughters. When he spoke, his voice was fractured, as if it had traveled a long way to reach the surface. Amelia. She didn't speak right away. Her hand curved protectively around Lyra. She watched him carefully, steady and grounded. Eleni blinked at him, tilting her head with curious innocence. He swallowed hard, his eyes going to the girls again. His voice was barely a whisper, cracked with disbelief and the pain that arrived 3 years too late. "Are they?" Amelia nodded once, a small, quiet gesture. "Yes." There was no accusation in her tone, no explanation, no anger, just the truth. Something inside him shattered, not just from pain, but from recognition. The world he had built, every choice he had justified, every excuse he had believed, all crumbled in a single exhale. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't even confused. He understood. He had walked away from a life he didn't know had already begun. And now that life was standing in front of him, in tiny sandals, holding a toy seashell, looking up at him with the eyes he had given them, he couldn't reach out for them. He didn't have the right. So he did the only thing left for him to do. He looked at Amelia, truly looked at her, and for the first time in years, his voice carried no pride, no certainty, no armor. "I didn't know," he said, and the words trembled. But beneath them, unspoken, lived a deeper truth. If he had known, everything would have been different. Amelia held his gaze, strong and unbroken. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," she said softly. And in that moment, both their lives changed again. Not backward. Forward, into something neither of them understood yet. Chapter 5. Slow rebuilding. Not regret, but presence. He didn't leave the hotel that day. He couldn't. The world he had known just hours ago felt distant, unfamiliar, as if someone had quietly replaced it while he wasn't looking. He walked outside, needing air, but the ocean breeze did nothing to calm the storm inside him. His hands were shaking slightly, a detail he once would have fought to conceal, but now he didn't care who noticed. He leaned on the railing overlooking the water, watching the waves, trying to reassemble himself into something coherent. He had lost many things in life, deals, friendships, meaning, but nothing had hit him like this. The certainty that he had missed the first steps, the first words, the first time they had said "Mama." He felt it in his chest like something raw and open. He didn't deserve to grieve it, and yet the pain arrived anyway. He sat there until the sun, once bright and golden, softened into the gentle orange of sunset. He didn't know how long he was there. Time had stopped having boundaries. Finally, a tiny voice broke the fog. "Mommy says we shouldn't talk to strangers." He turned slowly. Lyra was standing a few feet away from him, her small hands clasped together, her posture cautious, but not afraid. Eleni hovered behind her, holding a seashell against her chest like a shield. They should have been laughing in a hotel pool, asking for ice cream, doing anything but confronting the quiet heartbreak of an adult world they didn't yet understand. Arthur knelt down so he didn't tower over them. His breath was unsteady as he spoke. "You're right. Your mommy is very wise." Lyra's eyes, his eyes, studied him intensely. That same quiet intelligence he'd always had, but never knew he could pass on. Eleni, braver in emotion than her sister, stepped closer. "Why were you sad?" she asked, her voice small and sincere. He swallowed hard. This moment required the kind of honesty he had always avoided. "Because I missed something very important," he said, choosing each word slowly, carefully. "I didn't know it was mine to miss." They didn't understand. Not fully. But children master emotional truths even before language catches up. Eleni came closer first, placing her tiny hand on top of his on the railing. It was a gesture so simple and so powerful that he had to duck his head for a moment, blinking back the tears he didn't want to shed in front of them. Amelia walked up a few moments later, moving in silence. She had given him space to see them, to truly see them, but had stayed close enough to intervene if anything felt overwhelming. Her presence was firm, grounded. She didn't rush. She didn't pull the girls away. She simply stood beside him and let the moment unfold. The four of them walked to the quiet garden terrace just outside the lobby. It was a small space with benches and flowering vines climbing up trellises, the kind of place designed for quiet conversations. The girls sat on the stone step, humming to themselves, swapping shells and examining petals. Amelia and Arthur stood a few feet apart, not looking at each other at first. He spoke first, his voice low. "Warren, you didn't owe me anything. I know that now." She didn't answer right away. The breeze whispered in the leaves, and in that sound was the same unspoken sweetness she had once loved in him. "I didn't tell you," she said slowly, "because you had already chosen a life without us. I wasn't going to give you a responsibility out of obligation or guilt. These girls deserve love given freely, not love born of duty." He nodded, and the honesty of it hit him like a truth he should have always known. "I wasn't the man I should have been," he admitted. "I thought love should be simple, easy, something that didn't require depth." He let out a breath, shame flickering in his expression. "I was wrong." Amelia didn't soften, but she didn't harden either. "People change," she said. "Some because they want to, others because life forces them to." He let out a quiet, painful laugh. "I think life finally caught up with me." They stood in silence, not the sharp, awkward silence of fresh wounds, but the stillness of two people who had lived long enough to understand that some conversations aren't settled by a single exchange of words. "What happens now?" he asked. Not demanding, not assuming, just wanting. Amelia looked at the girls. Lyra was tracing patterns on the stone with a fallen flower petal. Eleni was trying to balance her seashell on her knee. They looked peaceful, safe, loved. "We go slow," she said. "You have to get to know them. They have to get to know you. No promises you can't keep. No rushing. No claiming." His eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time in years, they held something soft, something open. "I'll earn it," he said quietly. "Not just their trust, yours too." Her heart didn't leap. It didn't break. It simply acknowledged him. Whatever they became, it wouldn't be built on apologies or regret. It would be built on presence, on patience, on choice. The sun dipped lower, bathing the garden in a warm light. The girls called to her, and Amelia walked toward them, her steps light, her hair catching the last glow of the evening. Arthur watched the three of them together, the life he had missed, but the life he might still step into. And for the first time in years, hope didn't scare him. It humbled him. It steadied him. And he knew with absolute clarity that the hardest part wasn't what he had already lost. It was what he was determined not to lose again. Audience interaction. Do you think Arthur is seeking redemption only for the girls or for Amelia too? Can he earn her trust back? Let us know your opinion in the comments below. Share this story with a friend who needs a reminder that it's never too late to choose the real thing. Chapter 6. Brick by Brick. The New Commitment. He began returning to the coastal village every weekend, at first with a quiet hesitation, as if afraid that if he moved too fast, the fragile balance might shatter. He no longer booked expensive suites or arrived in polished cars. Instead, he drove the long road in an old sedan he had recently bought, the engine steady and the drive quiet enough for him to think. He spent most of those drives in silence, reliving the years he had missed, trying not to drown in regret, but to learn to carry it without letting it control him. When he arrived, he never went directly to Amelia's door. He always walked to the beach first. Sometimes he found the girls already there, digging in the sand, or collecting shells in small baskets they had woven from dry reeds. He would approach slowly so they could see him coming, giving them the option to greet him or not. They always did. Eleni was the first. Always, her laughter bubbling up as she launched herself toward him without hesitation. Lyra followed more quietly, studying him with thoughtful eyes before sliding her tiny hand into his. The first time she did that, his throat tightened so hard, he had to look away. He learned to meet them where they were, He didn't overwhelm them with questions or affection. He sat in the sand and let them set the pace. They showed him their treasures, a smooth, heart-shaped stone, a tiny crab they found under a rock, spiral seashells of cream and pink. They talked in excited fragments, one voice overlapping the other, and he listened with an attention he had never paid to anyone in his business life. He discovered Lyra loved drawing patterns in the sand and could spend hours making intricate shapes only to watch the tide wash them away. He discovered Eleni loved building things, towers of pebbles, forts made of driftwood, anything her hands could mold. He didn't try to correct them or direct them. He simply joined them. Amelia watched sometimes from the porch or the path leading to the shore. She didn't stay close, but she kept close enough to intervene if necessary. She observed him the way one observes the weather, not to predict storms, but to understand the air. He was different now. The confidence was still there, but he no longer tried to fill every room. His silence was no longer sharp and cold. It was soft, contemplative. He had learned something she had learned long ago, that love is not loud. Love is a presence. One afternoon, rain started unexpectedly, the soft kind that came from warm clouds and made the world smell like salt and earth. Instead of rushing inside, the girls shrieked with laughter, leaping through shallow puddles that formed between the rocks. Arthur didn't stop them. He lifted his face to the rain and let it fall on him, blinking the water from his lashes as if it were cleansing instead of inconvenient. Amelia came out to the beach with umbrellas, but she paused when she saw the scene. The girls spinning and giggling, and Arthur kneeling down, his arms wide, letting Eleni leap into them as if she had been doing it all her life. Amelia lowered the umbrellas slowly, realizing they weren't needed. Later, after towels and hot soup and the soft quiet of night settled over the house, the girls were asleep, snuggled together in their shared bed. Amelia and Arthur sat on the porch, the air cool, the moonlight scattering silver on the ocean surface. "You changed," she said finally. Not accusing, not praising, just acknowledging. He let out a slow breath, folding his hands. "Life stripped me down. I thought I could control everything, including love. I was wrong." He didn't look at her right away, as if gathering the courage to do so. "I lost something that was real because I was afraid of anything that asked me for more than I was willing to give." She rested her arms on her knees, looking out at the water. "I wasn't easy," she said softly. "I know that." He shook his head. "You weren't complicated. You were deep, and I didn't know how to hold depth without drowning." Those words hung between them, almost luminous in their honesty. Amelia's chest tightened, not from pain, but from the recognition of a man who was no longer running from himself. The porch light flickered gently as a warm breeze passed. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Not because she needed reassurance, but because it was a truth they both had to walk through. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the sea where the waves rolled in a constant, patient rhythm. "I regret who I was," he said, "but I don't regret this moment, or where it led, or them. I don't regret them." His voice cracked slightly. "And I won't leave again." She closed her eyes briefly, letting those words settle. Not a promise, a quietly made commitment, without demand. The night held them in a gentle, firm embrace. They weren't lovers again. They weren't strangers anymore. They were something in between, a place where healing begins not with falling for each other, but with standing up, side by side. Chapter 7. The Foundation of Choice. A New Love. He didn't try to crash back into Amelia's life. He didn't ask to stay overnight. He didn't try to reclaim a spot that was no longer his. Instead, he built his presence slowly, brick by brick, as if building a home from the foundation up. The girls came to expect him on weekends, then on weeknights when work allowed. He learned the rhythm of the village, the way the light changed over the water in the late afternoon, the names of the shopkeepers, the way children's laughter sounded different in a place where the ocean softened every sound. He wasn't a visitor anymore. He was someone learning to belong. Lyra began to bring him her small notebooks filled with scribbles, stars, leaves, shapes that only made sense to her. She would sit next to him on the porch swing and draw in silence while he read, their silence warm and companionable. Eleni, on the other hand, insisted he help her build elaborate structures out of blocks and driftwood, creating towers that leaned precariously until they tumbled over, sending her into bursts of wild laughter. He learned to laugh with her, to really laugh, in a way that felt like something inside him was finally unclenching after years of being too tight. Nights often ended with all four of them on the beach as the sun dipped gently into the sea. Lyra collected shells with the care of someone handling something sacred. Eleni chased the tide until it pushed her back, and Amelia watched them with a softness that had grown stronger instead of weaker. Arthur sometimes stood beside her without speaking. There was peace in those moments, an understanding that not everything needed to be discussed right away. Something just needed to live in the stillness between breaths. Healing is rarely smooth. One afternoon, Lyra refused to take his hand. She stood staring at him, her small face crumpled with confusion, as if recalling something unspoken. Amelia watched from a few feet away, understanding what was happening before either of them spoke. "Mama," Lyra asked later, her voice barely a whisper as she sat beside Amelia in bed. "If he's here now, why wasn't he here before?" Amelia felt something twist in her chest, not pain, but the fragile ache of holding truth in hands that had to be gentle. She didn't speak ill of him. She never had. Children deserve a story free of bitterness. "He didn't know about you then," Amelia said softly, pushing Lyra's hair from her forehead. "And sometimes grown-ups don't understand what is important until later. But he knows now, and he's trying." Lyra absorbed this in silence, the way she absorbed everything. The next day, she put her hand in Arthur's unbidden. He didn't comment. He simply held it, carefully, like something precious. There was another moment, not loud, but deeply meaningful. Eleni, who was always bold and bright, tripped running along the shore and scraped her knee. She burst into tears, stunned more by the pain of the surprise than the wound itself. Instinctively, she reached not for Amelia, but for Arthur. He lifted her gently, holding her close, letting her bury her face in his shoulder. Amelia watched them, her arms half raised before slowly lowering them. Eleni shuddered in his arms for a long minute before the sobs faded to sniffles. When she finally pulled back, her small hand clutching his shirt, she whispered, "Don't go away." His breath hitched. He didn't promise. He didn't swear. He just said, very quietly, "I won't." Trust was being built not through speeches, but through moments like these. As the weeks turned into months, the village began to treat him not as a fleeting newcomer, but as someone returning to himself. Neighbors who had once watched him with cautious curiosity now nodded to him at the market, spoke to him at the bakery, and accepted the way he carried Eleni on his hip or walked hand in hand with Lyra. But the deepest change happened between him and Amelia. Their conversations grew deeper, not about the past. It would always be there, but it no longer held power over them in the same way. They talked about the present, about the garden Amelia wanted to plant, about the girls' new favorite songs, about the slow, steady unfolding of the life they were building. And they talked about the future, not in grand declarations, but in shared glances, in simple actions. In the quiet way they began to move around space with an awareness of each other. One evening, while the girls slept and the house was wrapped in a soft lamplight, Amelia and Arthur sat on the sofa, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth of the other's presence. The low hum of the ocean filled the silence. "I don't want what we had," she said quietly, surprised by how sure the words felt. "That was built on things we didn't understand yet." He turned to her, his expression steady. "I don't want that either." She held his gaze, quiet and unprotected. "If there is anything now, it has to be new, made slowly, made differently." He nodded once, a quiet promise. "Slow," he repeated. There was no rush. There was no attempt to reclaim an old love. Just two people learning to love each other for the first time, without fear. When winter arrived, the village transformed. The sea remained restless, but the wind softened, bringing the scent of pine instead of salt. Lights appeared in the windows early each night, flickering warmly against the cool blue twilight. The bookshop hung wreaths along its doorframe, and the cafe served hot chocolate with cinnamon. The world didn't slow down, but it felt gentler, as if it understood that some stories need soft edges on their ending. Arthur had rented a small house a short walk from Amelia's. It wasn't a grand house, not a statement of wealth or success, just a place with wide windows, creaking floors, and a porch overlooking the sea. He chose it because he wanted to be near, but not intrusive. Close enough for the girls to run to him. Far enough that nothing felt forced. The first night he slept there, alone, he stayed awake for a long time, not from loneliness, but from a strange, deep sense of arrival. The building of their life together was slow and deliberate. He learned to braid Eleni's hair, badly at first, until she laughed at the crooked plait and insisted he try again. He learned Lyra liked to be held in silence when she was overwhelmed, her tiny hand clutching the fabric of his shirt until her breathing evened out. He learned the shape of their laughter, the tears that came from tiredness instead of sadness, and the way their minds worked. One all intuition and brightness, the other deep water and quiet thought. Sometimes the girls would wake before dawn and snuggle into his bed, their heads resting against his chest as the sun peeped over the sky. Those mornings were the ones he treasured most, because the love there was simple, natural, unstrained. He didn't have to earn it through perfection. He only had to show up. For Amelia, trust came like the tide, never all at once. She had carried the world alone for years, and letting anyone back into that space took more courage than any heartbreak. Yet she found herself turning to him more often, not to depend on him, but to share the weight. He fixed the fence when the winter storms loosened the planks. He took the girls to the library on rainy days, letting them choose stacks of books taller than themselves. He helped cook dinner, learning slowly and laughing when Eleni insisted too much salt was required, to make it magical. One evening, near the end of winter, the four of them walked the beach. The tide was low, and bits of sea glass glittered on the sand like tiny hidden treasures. Eleni ran ahead, her laughter echoing down the shore, while Lyra walked between her parents, holding both their hands. The sky was streaked with lavender and pink, the sun sinking low and slow. Amelia looked at Arthur and realized how different he looked. Not older, not worn, but softened. The sharpness that had once defined him had melted into something steady, quiet, safe. He no longer carried the need to prove anything. The man he had become was someone new, someone she could get to know, rather than remember. He stopped walking, looking at the water. The sound of the waves filled the pause. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, not trembling, not unsure. "I don't want to go too fast. I don't want to interrupt what we've built, but I want to say something I've been holding on to for a while." He turned to her fully, his gaze open, steady. "I love the life we have now. I love them. And I love you. Not the memory of you, not the idea of you. You. Just as you are now." She didn't speak right away, because the words didn't require an immediate answer. They weren't a question. They were a truth placed gently in her hands. Lyra squeezed their hands tighter, and Eleni turned back to them, waving wildly before running back to join them. The four of them stood together, enveloped in the slow fading of daylight. Amelia felt something inside her settle. Not excitement, not fear, but peace. A peace earned, not given. She leaned into him, not as a promise of forever, but as a beginning, made of choice rather than circumstance. He held her, carefully and surely, and the girls pressed close to their sides. The waves rolled on, constant and endless. No grand statements were needed. No applause was required. Just four hearts learning to beat at the same rhythm. Love, real love, hadn't arrived in a flash of lightning or a fire. It had arrived in silence, by staying, by showing up, by starting over. And that was enough.